Kevin Cooney wrote a piece over at the Bucks County Courier-Times where Kevin writes. He covers the Phillies and other sports for the newspaper. And he says bringing the kids in right now isn't the answer. Now, you guys know that a lot of times I have been a proponent of bringing the young guys up. And typically I'm on board with that, right? Let's bring the young guys up. Let's see what they can do. And, you know, right after the 2011 season, after the 2012 season, you jump right back on that wagon. I saw enough. Let's move on. But Kevin writes that bringing the kids up right now isn't the answer. And typically, I'm a fan of just bringing guys up, seeing what they – this league is littered with players that are under 24 years old. And if you can play, you can play. However, in this instance, I might agree with Kevin. And the reason being, the guys in the minors aren't giving the Phillies any reason to bring them up either. We'll see what Kevin Cooney has to say about the Phillies and the organization, which Kevin is now going on to 6 years of bad baseball. Is the end in sight anytime soon?
No, not really. I mean, it's not the end. Is not in sight. But hey, you know, it's nice that Mike, you and I agree on something. I think for once. So with this franchise.
Well, I would say, like, you know, I get the calls all the time that people want to see the kids, and I can understand that side of the coin. Like, I'm not against it, but I would say in this instance that the kids in this organization aren't giving the Phillies any reason to bring them up. In the past, they might have had guys. The only guy I could say maybe would be Hoskins, and unfortunately for him, he's got somebody blocking him that doesn't deserve to be pulled.
I would say, if you look at it, too, I mean, Nick Williams has gotten hot recently. Roman Quinn, you can make the argument that he should come up here. Part of when I wrote that column, I was thinking is you can't just bring at least one guy up. You know, if you brought Roman Quinn up, I think there's an impression among some in the fan base that somehow he would be like the salvation, that he somehow would change this completely on his own and this team. And none of these guys are that, okay? So if you're going to turn it over, just turn it over fresh. Turn it over next year in Clearwater. Don't just piecemeal it with one or two guys right now and, you know, kind of, you know, let them come into this poisonous atmosphere with this franchise, with the fan base kind of rightfully down. I'm not saying that, you know, that it's a, you know, it's the fan base isn't completely within the rights to lash out, because they are. I mean, this is bad baseball. This is daily bad baseball. And there's not one portion of this team right now that's going well. But that being said, if you're looking at the long-term future of this franchise, I don't know if it's a good idea that these kids that you're so invested in, the Alfaros, the Williams, the Crawfords, all these guys, you bring them up now and throw them to the fire in with a organization that, quite frankly, is a tire fire right now.
This is a team that, you know, after 2012, they had 500. They have progressively gotten worse. Last year, they finally went up. They won 8 games more last year than they did the previous year. How has it gone backwards?
How has it gone backwards? Well, I think part of it is injury. You know, when you lose, they counted on Buchholz at the beginning of the year, and he obviously got hurt. You know, I think that you see guys who have regressed. I mean, Herrera, Franco. You know, in this month, Cesar Hernandez has taken a step back. You know, that there are guys who are just flat out struggling, and the starting pitching has not improved. I mean, you have Velasquez, who gets hurt last night, but Vinny Velasquez was the same pitcher he was last year. I mean, he's going 5 innings. He's not going deep in the games, and, you know, he has great stuff, but when you're running pitch counts into the 100, around 100 after 5 innings, you're not really that much of a help anymore.
No.
Because you're just burning your bullpen out. I mean, and early on, the bullpen really struggled. It kind of solidified itself midway through the month, but now it's getting taxed again. I mean, you have Nola go out after 3 innings tonight, you know, in 73 pitches, and, you know, obviously that's got to raise some alarm bells, and we don't know, you know, what was behind that. You know, to me, you add all this together, and it's just kind of a total team meltdown. And, you know, I think where you have to look is that the talent's just not there, Mike. I mean, they signed Odubel Herrera thinking he was part of the future. I think the more you see Odubel Herrera, I don't know how much you can count on him being part of the future. Maikel Franco, I think, has shown that he was probably, brought up prematurely. And, that's another reason when everybody talks about bringing the kids up, I'll bring Dominic Brown and I'll bring Maikel Franco, the dangers of bringing these kids up way too soon. And that's what some of this could be.
Yeah, I could see both sides of the coin there. But wouldn't you agree, Kevin, in today's baseball, there's a lot of young players excelling all over this league. Now, maybe they're excellent players, but not all of them are all-star franchise players, and there's a lot of kids that are 23, 24 years old that are every day. I mean, it just seems like the league is younger and younger, yet the Phillies have a lot of players in that age range that you have a lot of question marks about.
Yeah, and I agree with that, and some of them are even in still in the minors, and
yes,
you have questions about it. A Jake Thompson, who I think, should be at this point, you would think would be up here by now. He hasn't made that leap yet. I think part of this too is we're seeing how deep the problems were when Matt Klentak and Andy McPhail took over. And I'm not excusing Klentak at all, because some of the offseason moves, to be frank, have just bombed out. I mean, you look at what happened with, Michael Saunders has not lived up to what you expected. Howie Kendrick has been hurt for most of the year. Buchholz obviously hasn't worked. I mean, he has not had a great 2017. But the problems are deeper because to be honest, the franchise was in such a deep hole. I mean, that 99 games that they lost 2 years ago was not by accident.
No, but there's a lot of teams that have hit the bottom and made their way back up. And it seems
it also took the Cubs 3 100-loss seasons to get to the point they were at. I mean, and I think we all felt that the Phillies bottomed out in 15. Maybe this is bottoming out. And I don't think any of us saw that they would be a potential 100-loss team, but it's hard to argue right now that they're not on that path.
There was a time, where for a while there you would hear Lou Marson and Jason Donald, and those guys were the next. And I feel like that's what's happening right now, is you're hearing a bunch of guys in the minors, and we're all just waiting for them because this team's in such shambles. Back then, those players' names were being put up on a pedestal, but the team was good. They were just getting put up there to maybe shine their trade possibilities. Now you're hearing all these guys, Nick Williams, and you mentioned Jake Thompson, and we've seen Zach Eflin, and we keep hearing about, wow, they got all these pieces back in some of these trades that they made, for guys like Marlon Byrd and Papelbon, and you actually got things back for them. But unfortunately, it seems that those guys are just nice players and not really good players.
Well, they're not franchise-turning players. I think that's the main difference.
And do they have any of those guys? Do they have a franchise? We were talking about this before you came on, Kevin. I don't know that there's one player on the Phillies' 25-man current roster that another team says, I would take that guy. I need that guy off your team.
I would say Joseph would get a lot of nibbles, especially from the American League, if he's put up there, because he's still young enough that they can project him out. He could play first. He could play, DH and all. He could be a DH. And actually, you put him. I know today it's probably not the best argument on his defense. His defense is not awful. It's not Ryan Howard in the last years.
And he's a guy that I wouldn't. Another team might say, okay, we'll take him.
If you're looking at Joseph, I think Kendrick for a contender, if he stays healthy, is going to be appealing. Because he's a super utility guy. But yeah, do you have a guy who's going to be a major difference maker? Like is it going to be like Cole Hamels a couple of years ago? No,
right.
It's not. They don't have that. And and I think that is the one thing. They have a lot of, when everybody's talked about their pitchers, they've had a lot of 3 and 4 guys. Velasquez maybe a 2 or a 1, okay? But a lot of guys who are 3, 4, 5 in bottom of rotations. And I think that's, they've got a ton of those guys right now, and they don't have that lead horse, if you will. And that's a problem. And they're going to have to find it somewhere here that they're going to have to find kind of their stud. I mean, but you hope that this year you could develop a core that could supplement it. You know, that you could find 3, 4, 5 guys who would be appealing enough to, if you went out and got, you know, a Harper, you know, you were in the bidding for a Harper or for a Trout or for a Machado in a couple of years. They don't have that right now, and that's an alarming thing.
Kevin Cooney's with us here, and check out his piece at the Bucks County Courier-Times. He says, don't look for the Phillies to call up the kids. It's not the right time. And, you know, is there a guy that if it was the right time or if they just were saying, hey, we want to last year Tommy Joseph basically forced them to bring him up. Is there a guy down there that is deserving of a call-up?
Well, I think you can make the argument on Hoskins, but again, Joseph has hit well enough that you're not taking Tommy Joseph out of first base, and Rhys Hoskins can't play anywhere else.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a problem. I mean, you know, if you want to say Roman Quinn, sure, Roman Quinn has been decent enough. I mean, it's not 350. You know, he's not kind of forcing the hand in that sense, but he's played well enough that he could, you know, make the argument. But let me give you an example. Okay, everybody talks about Jorge Alfaro. Okay, and he's got to be better than Cameron Rupp, and he's got to be better than Andrew Knapp, and why not call him up? Okay, and a lot's been made in catching situation. Well, one thing, Alfaro has walked, last time I checked, it was 3 times for the season, and that was like leading up to early this week. Okay, he had like a 46-3 strikeout to walk ratio. That's not good enough. 2, his average in May was about 234. Okay, that's not good enough. And if you want a third part, his defense is as big a question as anything. He has a great arm, but his game calling, which has been the main complaint of everybody about these 2 catchers at the major league level, and I know Rupp has gone into an offensive slump, but the main complaint of the 2 catchers up here has been these guys can't call games well enough for these pitchers and spot pitches and everything. Well, everybody I've talked to said Alfaro has the same problem.
Okay.
So
that's fair then.
So yeah, I mean, so there's where you kind of run into a wall. You know, Nick Williams has had a great 2 weeks. I think they would like to see it go a little longer before they start thinking about bringing him up. J.P. Crawford was hitting under 200 early in this week. There's another issue. I mean, you know, it's layer upon layer upon layer of things that you have to figure out, and the temptation is to just do the knee-jerk, bring them all up. Well, one, you can't do it because there's 40-man and 25-man repercussions on it
right.
to your rosters, and you do have to preserve some trade pieces. And 2, not all of them are ready to be Major League Baseball players.
What is your evaluation or perception of Klentak? Is he – I mean, I know he's only had one really offseason. This is going into his second year, and so many people would say, well, it's not really fair to judge him. But do you have a gut feeling that he knows what he's doing or that he's got – you know, he's the right guy?
Mike, I would say that the look, and I said a couple weeks ago I thought that Pete Mackanin should have been extended. And I still stick by that because I feel like that, you know, Pete – there was at that point enough progress to determine that Pete deserved one more year with this, okay? This was early in May. Obviously now, you know, there's a lot of critics on Pete and whatever. I think that the one thing with Klentak is at some point there's got to be, you know, it's great to be patient, and I think every GM has to be patient and all that. But there is a point where a GM has to step up and say enough, and whether that is making a trade, whether that is releasing somebody. And I don't know if that point's now. It's hard to believe when you lost this much as you have this in May. I don't know if that point's now, but it's coming, where maybe you have to look at the pitching coach and Bob McClure and see what's going on here. You know, the Phillies have not fired a pitching coach mid-season in you know, I checked back to 1970, and that was the last date I looked, and it wasn't there. So, I mean, we're talking a long, long time here.
Right.
And I think that at some point, this is when Matt Klentak's going to get judged between now and that July 31st trade deadline. That's where a lot of his reputation is going to land. Yeah,
no doubt. And how much, in your opinion, because I feel like the Phillies have kind of, the fan base has kind of given them some passes. I think there's been this kind of swept under the rug that they're just kind of existing over here. You know, the Sixers did their thing, and that was judged on whatever side you're on there, but there was a definitive side for fans. The Eagles always have their opinions. The Flyers, you got back and forth whether or not, they should do this or that. But I feel like the Phillies have just kind of been existing. And do you think that's because that the Phillies have, they got that 08 thing and they're just kind of still living off of that?
Well, I'll point two things out. One, you haven't checked the Twitter feed recently, at least my Twitter feed, because fans are pretty hot.
Well, it seems in the last month, in this month of May, it seems like it's all of a sudden people are starting to say, wait a second, that baseball team I used to be really enjoy, they're not so good anymore. It seems like for all of a sudden it is kind of popping that this, like a bunch of people are noticing, and maybe that's because there's nothing else going on.
Well, I think that's part of it. I'll be honest, Mike, I think part of it is apathy. I think that they have fallen off the Philadelphia sports landscape. And say what you want about, and I'll tie this in with the process, okay? Which you and I kind of disagree on. But, the process, at least, the people who backed the process had an idea of, okay, one good lottery ball and one transformative superstar, and we're right there. Okay, and we've gathered as many ping pong balls, and it only takes one. Okay? Baseball's so different that it doesn't just take one. And I think there's more of a sense of helplessness with it. And I think that in a lot of ways that's caused people to tune out. And I think part of the past that you think is existing is because they did win under a decade ago, and they were good for a long time. And I think people understood that in baseball it's a natural ebb and flow because of draft picks and everything, and age and injury and all that. But I think also there was a point, maybe 2014 or so, where people just checked out, and they haven't checked back in completely yet.
There's no question that I think a lot of people have checked out, and the only thing they're checking back in on is to criticize, and we know that's easy to do so many times. Are there some things, though, that you like that are going on, or is it hard to find them?
Well, I mean, again, if you want to look at the minor league system, Lehigh and Reading and all of them are at least record-wise pretty good, if you believe in that. So if they want to sell hope, that's what they'll sell. But again, that's what leads to my argument of you don't bring them all piecemeal. You don't bring them all one or two at a time. You kind of swoop it in at a given point.
Do you buy the argument at all, Kevin? There's people out there, these old baseball people will tell you AAA is a death sentence. Like that's almost like a penalty to these guys that they've won 22 out of 24 games. What more do they need to prove?
What do they need to prove? They need to prove that, quite honestly, Mike, that they can handle major league stuff. And you can, I looked at like who Louisville had playing the other night. Okay, you look at that roster. That's not major league ready. I mean, there were a lot of retreads and everything. I mean, good Lord, I was watching I saw something from the Pacific Coast League, and Dominic Brown is still kicking around out there from in the Colorado organization. I mean, those type of guys. That's why sometimes you do have to look at little things, and guys get hot. Guys, that's why when like the Hoskins thing has come up, at first it was Rhys Hoskins had a great month of April, and so you naturally assume, all right, you want to see him continue a little longer. It was his first AAA experience. Now he's only getting blocked really by Tommy Joseph, and if you're the Phillies, you're probably wanting to build Joseph's value up. So it makes logical sense. That's where this is all going. This is all going that eventually these kids are going to come up. It's just, what's the point of rushing it when this season's lost? And to be frank, you have some guys that maybe have some trade value around here. Why not just let them play through July and see what happens, and then have a clean slate after July 31st?
Yeah, and then I guess there's a part of you that you look at the Hoskins-Cousins duo, two guys that weren't big-time prospects that kind of hit themselves into two names. and they almost have the Darren Ruff syndrome connected to them. And then you have Don Brown, who you mentioned as the number 1 overall player in minor leagues and never quite made it. And that's kind of stuck to J.P. Crawford as the number 1, minor league guy, and he's struggling. So it's like you look at those 2 examples and say, I don't know that I'm all that optimistic about the guys behind you either. So I think that's where the Phillies don't really have they're in a tough spot where they don't have,
Mike, prospects are prospects for a reason.
Yes.
Okay? Because they haven't come up here and they haven't shown that they are legitimate major leaguers. You think they can be. That's why you give that title prospect. But there is no such thing as a surefire prospect.
Never.
Because you don't know how guys react.
Baseball is really tough. I know Matt Klentak told Jim Salisbury that they're not going to send Franco down, but should they consider it?
I would consider it, just to clear his head. The part of the problem there is that they don't have a third baseman that you could plug in. I mean, if you send Herrera down, you have Quinn and Williams and a lot of other guys. There's not a third baseman in this organization right now that you go, he's the successor, because you thought Michael Franco was at least going to hold it down for a little bit until maybe you got into Manny Machado or Arenado's sweepstakes. But at this point, I don't know what they.
Well,
do.
weren't they hoping Franco was a pretty important piece of this puzzle?
I think they were hoping he was a possible centerpiece guy. At least the old regime was. It was funny because there's a lot of things about Franco I'm not sure fit into what the current Phillies management necessarily love about cutting back on strikeouts and all that. I mean, he's kind of an old-fashioned slugger, and he doesn't always put the ball in play. Yeah. And that's where I think that this organization's trying to change a little bit. And Franco didn't necessarily fit that, but again, he was the best option, at least until you got to the offseason of 2018 before you decided if you were going to spend big on Machado. And even then, you could have moved Franco in theory to first base if you wanted to. Now, I'm not sure. Look, 2 months in, it's tough to judge, but he's certainly not doing himself any favors. Okay,
Kevin Cooney, Bucks County Courier. Check out his piece on the Phillies. Where they stand right now is some guy Pinto is getting beat around, and they're losing. So what else is new? Yeah. What else is new? Hey, Kevin, we enjoyed it as always, pal. Good conversation.
Thanks, Mike.